Greetings, adventurers. This is DM Kurt. So, last week or so, the conversation was had, what can we do to make 5e more old school? And there were a number of suggestions, and I think some of them missed the mark. So, one suggestion, I think let's just say it's the first one, was make it more deadly. Now, that's easily done with current rules, but if you make the game too deadly, then you've gone too far. You see, D&D lives on three pillars: combat, exploration, and roleplay. And if you go too deadly, where the characters are just on a revolving door, if one gets killed, another one comes in, repeat as ad nauseum, you're going to have a situation where people are not going to bother learning each other's characters' names, and people are going to stop assigning personalities to these characters, knowing that they're basically disposable. Another suggestion was to bring in some of the old game mechanics into the present day. First of all, THAC0. Dude, no. THAC0 was a feature of the game, but it wasn't one of the game's virtues. It was required because of Descending Armor class, and it was counterintuitive, which was something that added an additional step to every combat roll. Now, as fast as you or I might have gotten in calculating it, it was not friendly to new players because there was this additional thing that they had to do every single time they fought. So let's leave THAC0 back in the dustbin. So another way was to make it another suggestion that I thought was pretty interesting was to make the game more focused on the resources. So you'd count off a torch every hour of exploring in the dark. You'd keep track of all your rations, ticking one off every day and maybe replenishing them if you hunted or foraged, and keeping track of encumbrance. Now, I like this sort of thing as a player, but I realize as a DM, a lot of my players that are at my table don't like doing the additional paperwork or the additional hassle. So make your own decisions as to what you want to do with your game with that. Another thing that was brought up, it was back in the day we only had the big four of classes: fighter, thief, cleric, and magic user, and maybe we should cut things back down to that. And we only had four races to start: human, elf, dwarf, halfling. Maybe we should cut things down to that. Well, the problem there is you're limiting player options for customization and to make their character unique, and the more you take away, the more pushback you're going to get, because you're just taking these things away and you got to have some rationale for it that promises them something in return. So I would be leery of that, but they were kind of on the right track, and I'll get to that later. Where I think that you're really going to make your game more like the better parts of the old days, because the old days had good and bad, but the better parts is in your game world more than the mechanics. So the four big things in the game world was, first, it was human centric. So in order to make your game more like that, I would say have mostly humans as your NPCs unless stated otherwise, and then beyond that, the elves, the dwarves, and the halflings. So you're staying with the big four there. Now, if your players want to play these other races, these oddball things, remember that actually a lot of these so-called oddballs have been around for longer than we really think of. So like the Tabaxi and the Aarakocra, they were in the game as early as 1st edition. They were monsters in the Fiend Folio, and as soon as I saw Aarakocra and Fiend Folio back even 1st edition, I wanted to play one. I thought they were absolutely cool. Well, allow your players to play some of these things, but just remind them, you are going to be the oddball. If you're an oddball race, you're going to be kind of the oddball, and you show up, the villagers are going to have some distrust of you. So 5th edition Player's Handbook, yes, it allows Tieflings and Dragonborn, but it also states very specifically that you are an odd race and there's going to be a negative first impression that you may have to overcome. That is a roleplay based difficulty that you're paying in response to getting the benefits of the race. There's a yin and a yang, there's an up and a down, and you got to take them both. If you want to play a monster like an orc or a goblin as a player character, that's something I would recommend not doing. But if you're going to allow the player to do it, tell them right straightforward, you're a monster, and be expected that in civilized areas you're going to have a problem. I think that by having this ginormous number of possible races and species, because it's basically species, let's just use that term, in any setting, you wind up turning it into the Mos Eisley Cantina. It doesn't make sense unless your game world, or at least that part of the game world, is at some kind of a gigantic crossroads where there's just every possible alternate world is going to meet there for some reason. Sigil in Planescape is a good example of a galactic crossroads, and I'm not sure that's really what you want to do, but it is an option. I just don't think you should. Back in the day, we generally played in a low magic world, so your fighters and your thieves didn't have any spells or spell-like abilities, and I would cut the magical type subclasses away from the thieves and the fighters. There goes Arcane Trickster, there goes Arcane Archer, there goes Eldritch Knight. But like I say, you're going to have to be careful in how much trimming you do. I would actually absolutely remove the Artificer and the Warlock. They did not fit in the old game, and if you're trying to make your new game kind of in that same style of low magic, I wouldn't throw them in there at all. The Artificer is basically magic items on request, just fabricating more stuff. And we didn't want to have things like lightning-powered trains and continual light-powered street posts on every street corner. So that's the thing about the low magic campaign. Now, it was also generally sort of a mock Europe. So you had the sort of campaign worlds where you could kind of compare them against Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, or let's just face it, they were kind of Lord of the Rings with the name scratched off the front of it. If your game world could fit similar to like a Lord of the Rings type thing, you're on the right track there in keeping that old school charm. Now I know eventually we went beyond those sort of things, beyond Greyhawk and such. We ended up in places like Oriental Adventures, Al-Qadim, eventually Spelljammer, Planescape, Dark Sun. I never played in Dark Sun, but actually looks really interesting. But this leads us up to the fourth and what I think is the most important old school style gaming thing. I think the most important part of our games was that alignment mattered. There were things that were objectively good and objectively evil. There were some gray in between, but there was definitely a good and evil. And sort of the presumption was that you were going to be a good person. You were going to be a hero, and your heroic character was going to strive against the forces of evil. And that was heroic gameplay. So I think that the alignment comes back as being the most important thing in making your game keep with that old school style. Anyway, that's my opinion. Please let me know in the comments if you disagree. Please like and subscribe. But this is DM Kurt, out.